Breaking news: an unprecedented escalation in the East China Sea. Chinese warships have opened fire on a Japanese Coast Guard vessel near the hotly contested Senkaku Islands, shattering a fragile peace that has held for years. Tokyo is reporting casualties, and the world is riveted as a long, simmering rivalry between two of Asia's most powerful nations erupts into open conflict. Across the globe, people gather around screens, watching history unfold in real time, the tension palpable in every corner of the world. For years, Chinese and Japanese vessels have shadowed each other in these disputed waters, circling the rocky outcrops of the Senkaku Islands. What began as routine patrols and stern warnings has now escalated. Today, words gave way to weapons fire, and the world's attention is fixed on this volatile flashpoint. Earlier this morning, the Japanese Coast Guard vessel Shikishima was escorting a small fleet of fishing boats near Watsurijima, the largest of the disputed islands. Suddenly, 3 Chinese Navy frigates appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes cutting through the mist, moving with unmistakable purpose. Over the radio, the Chinese commander's voice crackled with authority. "You are in Chinese waters, leave immediately or face the consequences." The message was clear: there would be no compromise. The Japanese captain, his face set with determination, refused to back down. He insisted on Japan's sovereignty over the islands, relaying orders to his crew to hold their position. The tension on the bridge was electric, every crew member bracing for what might come next. Suddenly, a Chinese frigate fired a warning shot across the bow of the Shikishima. The Japanese ship stood its ground, refusing to retreat. In a split second, the situation spiraled out of control. The lead Chinese ship unleashed a barrage of shells, tearing through the Shikishima's hull and sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. Alarms blared throughout the ship as chaos erupted on deck. Crew members scrambled to fight fires, rushing to extinguish flames and tend to the wounded. The sound of emergency sirens mixed with shouted orders, creating a scene of confusion and urgency. Amid the chaos, the captain managed to send a chilling message: "Under attack, hostile fire from Pilan, returning fire." The distress call echoed across the fleet, a stark signal that the unthinkable had happened. The exchange of fire lasted less than 10 minutes, but the damage was devastating. The Shikishima was left heavily damaged, listing in the water, its deck scarred by explosions and smoke still rising from the wreckage. Without hesitation, the Chinese warships moved to form a blockade, sealing off the islands and cutting off any hope of immediate rescue or reinforcement. The message was unmistakable: China was now in control of the waters around the Senkakus. News of the attack sent shockwaves through Tokyo. Prime Minister Kishida immediately convened an emergency meeting with top military and government officials. The city was gripped by a sense of crisis, emergency lights flashing across government buildings as leaders scrambled to respond. This was no minor skirmish, it was a calculated act of aggression. Beijing's official statement was terse, but the message was clear: the time for negotiation was over. The world's major powers watched anxiously, aware that the balance of power in the region was shifting before their eyes. The first shots had been fired, and the path to a wider conflict was now open. Across Asia and beyond, anxious crowds gathered in public squares, watching breaking news updates, their faces etched with worry. The world held its breath, knowing that the next decisions could shape the course of history. The Senkaku Islands, once little more than remote rocks in the sea, had become the flashpoint for a new and dangerous war. The fate of the region, and perhaps the world, now hung in the balance. The question now loomed over every capital: how far would this conflict go? As world leaders scrambled to respond, uncertainty and fear gripped the globe. The next move could mean escalation or the last chance for peace. To understand this conflict, you must first understand the islands at its heart. The Senkaku Islands, Diaoyu to China, are uninhabited rocks in the East China Sea. On the surface, they seem insignificant, but beneath the waves lie potential oil and gas reserves, discovered in the 1960s. For Japan, these resources mean energy security. For China, they fuel its economic engine. Control means immense wealth, but the dispute is also about history and pride. China claims centuries-old ties, calling Japan's control a legacy of humiliation. Japan insists it lawfully incorporated the islands in 1895 and has administered them ever since. For both nations, the islands are a symbol of sovereignty and national resolve. The stakes are far higher than a few barren rocks. The attack on the Shikishima was no accident. It was the result of years of Chinese military buildup under President Xi Jinping. China's navy is now the world's largest, backed by advanced ships, submarines, and a vast maritime militia. Anti-access missile systems threaten U.S. intervention, aiming to isolate Japan. Yet China's forces lack real combat experience, a critical unknown as war erupts. The first hours would test whether China's investment would pay off. Within an hour of the naval clash, China unleashed a coordinated assault. Cyber attacks crippled Japan's government, power grids, and communications. Missile barrages targeted Japanese and U.S. bases on Okinawa and Yonaguni, cratering runways and destroying aircraft. Chinese stealth fighters and bombers surged into the East China Sea seeking air superiority. Sirens wailed as explosions rocked U.S. and Japanese bases. The surprise was total. Chaos reigned. The first wave was designed to paralyze Japan and warn Washington, stay out. In just 60 minutes, the conflict escalated from a skirmish to full-scale war. The world watched as Asia's balance of power shifted. The stakes had never been higher. 2 hours after the onslaught, Japan was reeling but not defeated. The shockwaves of the initial attack rippled through the nation, but the spirit of the people and their defenders remained unbroken. Sirens wailed across coastal cities as emergency crews rushed to contain fires and tend to the wounded, while civilians anxiously watched the horizon, uncertain of what would come next. The self-defense forces scrambled to respond, mobilizing with a speed and urgency not seen in decades. Across the country, bases buzzed with activity as soldiers donned gear and prepared for the fight ahead. At Sasebo and Yokosuka, warships raced to sea, forming a defensive line to block a Chinese landing. The harbors, usually calm, now echoed with the roar of engines and the shouts of orders as crews worked in perfect coordination. Izumo-class helicopter destroyers, now operating F-35Bs, led the charge. These formidable ships, once symbols of Japan's defensive posture, now became the spearhead of its resistance, launching advanced stealth fighters into the sky. Kongo and Atago-class destroyers, equipped with Aegis missile defense, formed a steel wall. Their powerful radars scanned the skies and seas, ready to intercept incoming threats and protect the fleet from missile barrages. JSDF sailors faced a daunting challenge, fighting a peer adversary with no modern combat experience. Every decision carried immense weight, and the tension on the bridges was palpable as officers issued commands and crews braced for battle. Every ship was a target for Chinese submarines and bombers. The threat was constant and unseen, forcing crews to remain vigilant, scanning the waves and skies for any sign of danger. In the air, F-15J and F-2 fighters scrambled to engage Chinese aircraft, outnumbered but determined. Pilots raced skyward, knowing they faced overwhelming odds, but driven by duty and the hope of turning the tide. The first dogfights erupted over the East China Sea. Missiles streaked through the sky as jets twisted and turned in deadly aerial duels, each side fighting fiercely for control of the airspace. It was a desperate struggle for control of the skies and seas. The thunder of missile launches and the roar of jet engines filled the air as both navies pushed their technology and training to the limit. The fate of the islands and the nation hung in the balance. Every moment, every decision could tip the scales toward victory or disaster. Japan's resolve was being tested like never before. In command centers and cockpits, men and women steeled themselves for what was to come, united by a single purpose: to defend their homeland at any cost. The battle had only just begun. As night fell, the struggle intensified, and the world watched to see if Japan could withstand the storm. In Washington, alarms blared as news of the sudden attack reached the Pentagon, shattering the calm of the night. Senior officials rushed into the Situation Room, faces tense as they absorbed the gravity of the unfolding crisis. The air was thick with urgency, every second counting as the world watched and waited for America's response. The U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, a cornerstone of post-war alliances, demanded immediate action. Decades of partnership and mutual defense obligations now faced their ultimate test. American and Japanese leaders exchanged urgent messages, reaffirming their commitment to stand together in the face of aggression. Indo-Pacific Command mobilized without hesitation. The USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group, a symbol of American naval power, surged toward the conflict zone, its crew on high alert, wary of the threat posed by advanced Chinese missiles and submarines lurking beneath the waves. Submarines and destroyers, from Pearl Harbor and San Diego, set sail, cutting through the Pacific at top speed. Their mission: reinforce allies, deter further escalation, and prepare for the possibility of direct confrontation. In the skies, B-2 stealth bombers, B-52s, and F-22 Raptors were rapidly deployed to forward bases, their presence a clear signal of American resolve. Ground crews worked around the clock, loading munitions and fueling aircraft for what could become the largest air campaign in decades. The logistical challenge was immense. U.S. forces in the region were stretched thin, vulnerable, and outnumbered by Chinese forces already in position. Supplies, fuel, and reinforcements had to be moved quickly, all while under the threat of enemy attack. The president, in a series of high-stakes calls, reassured Japan and other allies of America's unwavering commitment. Yet, as the White House reached out to Beijing, the lines remained silent. Diplomatic channels were met with stone-faced silence, raising fears that China was determined to press its advantage before the U.S. could fully respond. Inside China's military command centers, officers worked with steely focus, determined to achieve their objectives swiftly. Every move was calculated, every second used to gain ground before American reinforcements could tip the balance. In Seoul, South Korea's leaders watched anxiously, caught between two powerful rivals. Military units were placed on high alert, and citizens braced for the possibility that the conflict could spill across borders. Across the region, civilians gathered around televisions and phones, watching the news with growing fear. Military vehicles rolled through city streets as governments prepared for the worst. The entire Asia-Pacific braced for a conflict that could reshape the world order. The world's two largest militaries now stood on a collision course, their forces arrayed across land, sea, and air. The risk of miscalculation was immense, and the consequences could be catastrophic. The stakes could not be higher. The very future of Asia hung in the balance. As the clock ticked down, the world held its breath, knowing that the decisions made in these critical hours would shape history for generations to come. As night fell, the first major naval battle erupted south of Okinawa. The Japanese fleet, led by the Aegis destroyer JS Otago, advanced to break the Chinese blockade. The Chinese, tracking their approach, set a deadly trap. The battle began with a massive volley of anti-ship missiles. Japanese Aegis systems intercepted many, but some broke through, crippling the JS Murasame. The Japanese struck back, launching their own anti-ship missiles. Explosions lit the sea as both sides took heavy losses. Beneath the waves, Japanese Soryu-class submarines hunted Chinese subs, scoring a critical kill. The clash was brutal and costly, a bloody draw. Both sides realized the terrible price of war. The East China Sea was now a graveyard of ships. The conflict had entered a new, deadly phase. 24 hours in, the war had engulfed the region. The initial naval battle was inconclusive but devastating. Chinese missile strikes continued to pound US and Japanese bases. The USS Ronald Reagan launched sorties, fighting for control of the skies. US submarines targeted Chinese ships and supply lines. A second carrier group, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, steamed toward Japan. Global markets crashed, oil prices soared, trade ground to a halt, crippling China and Japan's economies. The United Nations was paralyzed, the world split into rival camps. Southeast Asia watched in fear, caught between economic ties and security concerns. The war over a few islands now threatened to redraw the global order. The world teetered on the edge of a new era of great power conflict. Weeks of brutal fighting led to a bloody stalemate. China's initial shock campaign failed to deliver victory, but its missile shield kept US forces at bay. Both sides suffered heavy losses, ships, planes, and lives. China's navy proved vulnerable, but its industrial might allowed it to replace losses quickly. Japan's losses were harder to bear, its economy and sense of security shattered. The war's human and economic toll was immense. No one truly won. A fragile ceasefire brokered by international powers ended the fighting. Asia emerged more dangerous and divided. China had shown its willingness to challenge the US-led order. The US proved its commitment, but at a staggering cost. Japan was left wounded and forever changed. The war over the Senkakus marked the dawn of a new, uncertain era in the Pacific.